Hey, Nick. How's it going? Oh, I can't hear you. Hold on. Are you muted?
Oh, yeah. There you go. I said, hey, Dave.
Dave, yeah. He came on the run with me. My skin's red because I just got back, so I'm going to probably just use my... How are you doing? There's Dave. Dave, you want to say hi to Nick?
Hey, Dave.
Morning.
How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
He actually dresses, yeah, he's dressed for work.
I'm still business.
Yeah, no, you and Betsy. Betsy's the same thing out the door
Yeah,
today. So.
yeah, she has to wear the medical professional clothes.
Yeah.
How are you holding up?
Good. Yeah, I didn't get out and run this morning. Today was like the first Wednesday off of that training plan in a while, so it was nice not to have to.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna say goodbye to Dave really fast.
Alrighty.
Hi there.
Look at cactus. That's new.
That's
Or a new spot.
That's Cuddles.
Cuddles. I like that.
Yeah, it's actually doing really well. We've had it for like a year.
Really?
Yeah, it's grown quite a bit. It's pretty easy to take care of. You only have to water it like once every 2 months.
That's awesome.
But yeah, we saw 2 elephants this morning. It was pretty cool.
So are they a new spot?
So they're in the same spot, right by the lake there. But when you're walking up around the lake, you're a little elevated so you can see right into their habitat. And so they were just out of like their indoor habitat and walking to the outdoor habitat. So they were kind of in that like one walkway area. And one was walking backwards and the other one was walking forwards, and they were like playing with their tusks. And it was super cute,
I need to run around City Park. I never make it over there because I'm always like turning around before I get there. So
yeah,
you just like drive and start there.
Now, like one of my favorite longer runs when I'm training is to go down around Wash Park and then up through Congress Park around City Park and then
Nice.
back home. So I think that's.
Hey, good morning, Jim.
Hey, Tim. Hey, Tom. This is Lizzie. I'm Nick's colleague. Hey, Tom, good to see you.
Great to see
Yeah.
you. Good
Yeah.
morning. Hey, Jim. How are you?
Oh, Jim, you're on mute. I think it's set up once you join, you're on mute, and then you have to unmute.
Unmuted.
There you go. There you
So
go.
you are. How are you?
Doing well. Many times people like to mute me remotely, but I tend to just talk a lot. Looking forward to this morning.
Yeah. Thank you both for jumping on and joining us. So
How are you guys doing?
good. Lizzie was walking me through her run this morning. She saw a few elephants, so it's hard to top that.
Wow.
It is. How did that happen?
I just live right near City Park, so just ran around the lake there, and the 2 elephants were coming out of their indoor habitat, going to the outdoor habitat, but there's a walkway where you can see them pretty clearly, so that was fun. And then there was a bald eagle right above them, just coincidentally. So it was quite the nature moment. A little different than yesterday because there were so many people at City Park yesterday. Jim, you live in Denver? Where are you based?
I live in Boulder. I used to live at 16th and Gaylord.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So I've run City Park many times.
Yeah, it's definitely my morning route. So yeah, we're on 25th and Franklin. We've been in the same house for about 15 years. So seen a lot of changes happen in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot nicer since I lived there.
How long has it been since you've lived in the neighborhood?
That was 92.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, tons of
Are you that
changes.
old? Damn.
I was just out of graduate school. It was $300 a month, cash rent, no credit check. It's like, okay, welcome to Colorado.
Yeah.
That's good. Is that Lizzie? Is that Pat's number? Not.
No, that one's not Pat's. That's a 650 number. It's Bay Area.
Yeah, it's the non-private Zoom snoop.
Yeah.
I've been hearing about those.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to take care of those. But yeah, as we're waiting for Pat, I did see Jim. You're the runner too. You do your own ultras. Is that what I saw? You create your own.
Runner since high school and moved to Colorado. I was like doing triathlons. That's why I ended up in Boulder in '93. And so have done a lot of different things over the years. But as you get older, you can't go faster, you go farther. And so 2011, I did my first 100 up in Leadville. That was interesting.
Really?
I think it's more fun to sort of make up your own events. Doing trail work one day north of Boulder with a group of people, and it was on Heil Ranch. And I asked this lady, I said, well, how far does it connect Heil Ranch and Hall Ranch up in Lyons? She goes, oh, it's probably 25 miles if you do them together. She goes, but it's 50 if you're running from town. I'm like, shit, right? It's like, it just puts that seed in your head like, yeah, you could leave Boulder, go up through Boulder Valley Ranch, Joder, out through Heil, out to Hall, and back. That's a nice 50-mile day. So you figure out the aid stations and find a time to go do it.
Yeah, good for you. That's awesome.
It is, Pat.
Hey, Pat.
I'm doing the Leadville 50 this summer. It's my first one. So
The Silver Rush 50?
Yeah.
So that kicked my butt 2 or 3 years ago. I thought it wouldn't be too bad, and I tried to run it for time. And let's just say I didn't. I dropped it halfway.
Good morning, guys. Everybody looks so happy and healthy today. Jim and Tom, thanks for joining. How are you feeling today?
Terrific. It's a
All
pleasure.
right, good. That's awesome. And Laurie, do we have you on the line as well? I see Laurie. Looks like Laurie might be muted. Here, Laurie. Have you guys heard from Laurie yet? Has she said anything?
Or Lizzie, maybe you have the controls to unmute Laurie.
I'm going to give it a try. Let's see.
Thank you.
Hi. How are you, Laurie?
Morning.
Good
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great.
How are you?
Oh, doing
Good.
great. So
I was wondering if you could hear me. I was like, hi, I'm here. Hello. I'm awake.
Well, good to hear you now. So, hey, so thank you three for joining the call. The format is going to be this for today. And I know it's in the outline I sent you, but we're going to start off doing 10 minutes of just community updates overall for GAN. And then from there, for the next 50 minutes or so, or just say 40 minutes or so, we're going to dig in and talk to Jim and Tom. I imagine most of it's going to be me asking you questions. I'm going to be looking at the chat just to see if there's things that are coming in from people. Right. But I imagine most of it's going to be me just sort of sitting here asking you stuff. And then at the end, Laurie is at Pacific Western Bank and is just going to give a quick update about what's going on with the CARES Act for those in the States and how to interact with your bank. So we'll end with that from Laurie. Yeah, and again, this purpose of today's call at a super high level is really just going, like, both of you have experienced the 08 crisis. Both of you were leaders in the 08 crisis. It was similar and also very different to what we're experiencing now, right? So a lot of today is me going in and going, and two, we have sort of people are coming in with two different lenses here. One is they're running their own accelerator or studio, or even they're at a company like large corporation, and they're trying to survive, right? So they're going to be hearing this advice, going, how do I even just survive? But also, too, more importantly, they're going, how do I actually keep my startups alive? Right. So I'm sort of going to be teeing this up as more of the latter, about what things we need to think about, what things we need to be telling our startups along the way, but also just keep in the back of your mind, a lot of people are even just fighting for their own survival during this time. So any thoughts or questions from you three before we go on mute and wait for everybody else to jump in?
I don't think so.
Are you
good?
Yeah, Pat, I'd just say, if anything financial comes up, I've worked through many bubbles now, so
Yeah.
I'm having many financial crises, so I'm happy from a financial lens to chime in if you need a
Okay.
perspective.
Awesome. Thank you. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other questions, Jim or Tom? You feel good?
Yes.
All right, cool.
Feel
Right.
good. Might challenge your notion that survival is the goal.
Yeah, survival is the goal.
No,
Survival.
might challenge your notion that that is the goal.
Oh,
But,
tell me more.
Well, 08 I was at Oracle, so I kind of missed that one because of a nice big parent.
Yeah.
But I also raised money in February of 2000. A month before the market fell
Mm.
apart in March and April of 2000.
Yeah.
I also raised money on September 10th of 01, the day before 9/11, and so twice I've had the floor drop off underneath me. And I think when things change like as radically as they have, maybe survival isn't the goal. Like my startup after the 2000 crash, it didn't survive. We took convertible debt from our local VCs who were trying to help us, and basically I think we just wasted their money and our time, delaying the inevitable. And I think that the implicit fallacy is that the company you're working on has to be the one to survive. And I think that when I think maybe about the people, right? You want the founders to survive so they stay in the ecosystem. But I think venture-backed companies aren't even the right word. It's a venture-backed team, and it's like a project team, but it needs to disband. If it just didn't work, and if it's just if this thing that you created, more than a month ago is not going to work going forward, then they just sort of recognize that, park it cleanly, and move on to your next thing. And I really wish I would have spent, that year doing something different than trying to make my thing survive. And then rinse and repeat a year later. It was just like doing we did 3x liquidation preference to raise money in 01, right? It's just like, what are you doing? Versus, what was the rise of social media, right? It was like we could have, start a whole different business and not try to do security in that case. So that's at the sort of individual company level. And even on the accelerator level, which might be challenging for this audience, but we're 13 years into the accelerator cycle. And so maybe it's time for people who are deeply in the accelerator model to try and step back and think about, what if you just blew up this whole concept of accelerators and started over? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. Love it. Thank you. We will go down that path. Tom, anything else you want to make sure we tee up today?
Well, what Jim just said, it parallels something I think you and I talked about yesterday briefly, Pat, which is, fundamentally, if you can look around and at what it is you built and what you're doing and what's happening in the world and recognize there's no fit between the two, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to to spend cycles and resources trying to preserve something that has little chance of ever finding the light of day.
Yeah.
And some things probably shouldn't continue, but there are different survival pieces, and there's also different leadership pieces that are interesting to talk about in all of this. What does leadership mean in a context where you actually can't see very far into the future yet and don't understand what that looks like? What do you do? How do you approach that uncertainty?
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
Okay. Guys, well, no, we got 5 minutes. I'm going to put us all on mute just as people start dialing in, and then we'll get started. So, Jim, Tom, Laurie, thank you all for being here. It's going to be fun. I'm going to put on some fun elevator music.
Waiting with bated breath.
Waiting. Here we go.
I don't think we're on mute yet.
No, not yet. Hey, Liz, do you mind putting them
Say-
on mute until we get started?
Sure, no problem.
All right, cool.
Hi, Pat. How are you?
Hi, guys. I like the music. I like the music.
Let's get this all warmed up, ready for today. Hey, everybody, we're going to get started in just about 4 minutes, so hang tight while we have others join in and enjoy the music. Tom, this is that song I know you wanted me to play today. So it's Cricket Sing for Anna Maria. I know it's one of your favorites.
Hey, Pat, I have another meeting in half an hour, so it's Alana. So if I drop off, it's not because I don't think it's useful.
That's awesome. Thanks, Alana. Hey, for those of you calling in, we're getting started in just about 2 minutes. So hang tight, we'll get started. All right, one more minute, everybody, and we'll get started. All right, 30-second warning. Hello, everybody. This is Patrick Riley. I'm the CEO of GAN and managing partner of the GAN Ventures Venture Fund. It's so good to have all of you on the line today. I'm seeing a lot of familiar and great faces on the line. So welcome everybody to today's call. I want to give you a quick rundown about how today's call is going to go, and then we'll be digging into things. First of all, I want to go over a bunch of community updates that are happening in and around GAN right now. Secondly, I'll be digging into the high-level purpose of today's call, and then I'll be digging into why we all called today, which is to hear from Tom Higley, the founder at XGenesis and 101010, Jim Franklin, who's the former CEO at SendGrid, and also Laurie, who is a good friend of ours over at Pacific Western Bank, to talk about the CARES Act. So with that, I want to sort of tee off a few things for today. Who is on the call? There's three different groups that are on the call. Number one, it's GAN accelerators. These are people who are leading some of the best accelerators in the world. We also have studios from GSSN. This is the Global Startup Studio Network. These are the groups who are leading some of the best studios in the world. And then we also have GAN's corporate partners on the line. These are the people who are either engaging with startups on a daily basis, people like SendGrid, or other groups who are looking to do business with startups, people like Allstate and State Farm. So we have a really amazing dynamic group on the line today, which also means that that number one, the conversation is going to be interesting. But I think the best part about this call is that everyone has a very shared mission, which is everyone's focused on giving startups the power to create and grow their businesses and help them make an impact wherever they are. So in light of that, let's get started on the quick updates, and then we'll dig into today's call. Every Wednesday going forward, we're going to be hosting this call related to something that is relevant for you for COVID-19. Next week is going to be a conversation on how do we actually get companies investments during this period. And the call after that is how do we actually build virtual systems and processes and operations for our programs. But again, next week is going to be on investments. The other thing is on Thursday nights at 5 p.m. Eastern, I know this is a little bit harder for people who are outside of the States, but at Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be doing a happy hour. And the purpose of the happy hour is for you to go off and blow steam. We're going to hear from 2 or 3 people who are going to start off and just sharing how they're doing. And mainly it's just to share, it's a great time for us to sort of have shared experiences during this time. But those are going to start tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Mountain Time, and you will see stuff come from our team today about that. For the accelerators on the line, a few things to quickly know. Number one, you'll see something come to the chat window in just a second. AWS is sort of throwing everything at this, and they're doing a big call today for any accelerator leaders who want to dig in and discuss how to actually help your companies save costs during this time. So keep looking out for that. Secondly, we continue to offer free counseling services for your founders for a first session, and then we're picking up 50% of the cost for any founder who needs coaching or counseling. You can get that on the GAN Insight and just continue to push that that's still available. And finally, you will see early this month, Lizzie on our team is collecting deal flow, is collecting startups who want to join accelerators. She is sending that out in the next few days to all the GAN startups. You'll see a curated list of some of her favorites that she has found along the way, but also she will be sending you the list of all the companies that we have been seeing in the past month that are looking to go through an accelerator program. We realize this is a time where it's hard to travel, it's hard to get out in the world. So Lizzie has done a great job at pulling that together, and I'm very, very thankful for that. For the GAN partners online, just so you know, ChargeBee, one of our great friends over at ChargeBee, they're hosting weekly roundtable calls. The next one is with Claire Liu on April the 9th. And that's and she's the founder of Know Your Team. Then on April 16th, Brendan Schwartz, who's the CTO of Wistia, is going to be doing another call. So just be paying attention to that. And finally, for the studios on the line, we're excited to be having Reagan Smith, who is joining the GSSN team. She will be doing a lot of the community support alongside Nick. So be looking for stuff coming her way. She is going to be sending out a survey to you all every week, just asking questions about how you're doing. And then the following week, we'll be sharing those results with all of you. So that way you're in the know about all this fun stuff that's happening in the studio world. For everybody on the line, accelerators, partners, studios, we talked last week about how the summit will be coming up. And we officially have a date for this to happen. It's October 7th through the 9th in San Diego, California. As we released this, we were laughing because we realized that this may be something where we have to postpone it. But we're going to keep you posted and up to date as things progress about how that comes. But we officially have a date and a location. So if you should have received something from us last week about on Monday about that. And if you didn't, let me know. Cool. So I want to dig into today's call now. And let me just kind of go over the purpose of today's call, and then we'll dive into our two great speakers. So the purpose of today's call is to have an open discussion with people who have navigated these, we'll say, similar times before, and manage companies amidst these crises. Both Jim and Tom, who I'm about to introduce, were leaders at their organizations during previous crises, and number one, not only had to navigate it, but also got their companies through it. And even as Jim and I were talking earlier this morning, Jim made a point of going, I hear you, Pat, saying that it's all about survival, but it may not even be about survival, maybe about something else. So we're going to dig into that today. So what I want you to leave today knowing is 4 things. Number one, have an understanding of what founders have faced during previous recessions. We want to have sort of empathy to come alongside of them and go, what was this like for you? Secondly, we want to hear what can you do now to avoid or navigate some of the long-term challenges for your startups. Third, what can we be doing to take care of your team's well-being? And then we'll also hear from other pieces of advice from Tom and Jim. In terms of our speakers, we have 2 amazing people today. Number one, Tom. Tom is the CEO and founder of XGenesis and 10-10-10. He's also on the GSSN advisory board. In his work with XGenesis and 10-10-10, Tom focuses on encouraging entrepreneurs to tackle wicked problems. Together, they serve as process, program, and platform for entrepreneurs who want to discover sort of this idea of founder opportunity fit. To date, Tom has produced 12 new ventures. And what I love about Tom's bio the most, it's this. He has his personal goals. And his personal goals are, number one, to learn. Number 2, to support the creation of great companies that deliver success for key stakeholders. And 3, see those he cares about find their own path to a great life. And then Jim. Jim is an active limited partner, board member, and advisor to the startup community. He was most recently CEO of SendGrid. But here's the thing, prior to that, Jim was also the vice president of enterprise performance management and general manager of the Crystal Ball Global Business Unit of Oracle. So what I love about Jim is you're coming in with this very startup focused hat, but also to a Fortune 500 hat with Oracle. He's held roles of CEO, CFO, and VP of sales. He's on a ton of boards. He's a CPA. Is licensed to practice law in Pennsylvania and Colorado, and is just an incredible human overall. So with that, I just want to say thank you all for joining today. I want to dig in, and I want to sort of have empathy for you two. And let's start off with Tom. Just give us a minute of what you were doing in previous crises just so we can have the idea of what you're dealing with and what sort of roles you're in at the time.
Yeah, so let's go back. Actually, even before I say that, I just want to dispel any notion that that I, or I think any of us, have experienced this before, right? These are unparalleled, unprecedented times. So I think even if we knew somebody who'd gone through the 29 stock market crash and survived the Great Depression, or had endured the privations of World War II, probably that really isn't still the same as what we're experiencing here in this context. So that said, in what now appears to be a relatively de minimis crisis, the bursting of the bubble in 2000, 2001 for the dot-com space was one situation that I remember dealing with quite vividly. And then the second was what happened in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. And I can speak really, really briefly to each of those. And then if there are questions, we can go forward. So in the dot-com bust, I'd just come off having this rocket success with a co-founder. And this was really our thing to do ahead of there being studios. And we had decided that we would start new ventures. We would run them for a moment and then bring in a new CEO, and then we'd move on. I raised $21 million to do this and was its CEO and found a CEO to replace me. And I discovered about 9 months into the tenure of the new CEO that maybe things weren't going to work as I expected or as we expected, when he said to me, "We only have $18 million left in the bank, and I don't think we can get there from here." So what happens in times like this is the people who are used to a particular way of doing business want to do business in the way they're used to doing business. And that's maybe the first or fundamental lesson. It's that it's not business as usual. It can't be. And you want leadership. You want someone who's actually willing to recognize that in the context of uncertainty, you have to look around, figure out what to do, take action, and make decisions. And I just didn't have that in the person that I brought in. I was on the board. It was difficult. It was challenging. We got through to the other side, and my co-founder managed to navigate pieces after that. So I was thrilled about that. Similarly, in 2008, it was really hard. I managed to lead a round of financing and brought a bunch of friends in, and felt a real obligation to the people that I brought in as investors. We went through a first CEO, a second CEO, and then I found myself in the seat as sort of the default go-to. And it was just extraordinarily difficult to look around and try to reconcile what we'd funded to begin with what we now had to begin to do. And they were really, really different things. I think I pivoted 3 times in the course of that. And I think you may hear from Jim and others about this. Sometimes the right thing to do is look around and say, you know what? This isn't the right thing to do with the money that we raised, and we should stop. We should be done. We should look for our next thing to do. That's the best thing to do with investors' money, with your team's time, with your future. So I'll pause there.
Great intro, Tom. All right, Jim, over to you. Same question. What were you doing during previous crises?
Yeah, so probably 3 experiences are relevant. I was a founder back in 2000, raised $5 million of institutional money, February of 2000. So the month just before the NASDAQ peaked at 5,000 and then just fell through the floor. And that business didn't end well. And then in 01, I was the CFO at a venture-backed company, and we raised $5 million on September 10th of 01, literally the day before 9/11. And that business went through a lot of troubling times over the next 2 years as the world had changed yet again. And then in 08, I was at Oracle. So we actually had sold a business, or I was CEO back in 07 to Oracle. And so I was in the Oracle bubble through the 08 period of time. And so that was a great place to be because it really didn't impact the Oracle universe much at all. Which was nice. So some lessons learned from those different experiences we can share as we go on.
Cool, Jim. Thanks. So Jim, I'll start with you. And I kind of want to divide this up into 3 different parts today, right? The first one is, and again, let's think about who everybody's on the line. Everybody on the line is supporting startups. So the idea here is sort of be giving advice towards how do we actually help startups? How do these people go and help startups? But also too, people here are worried about their own organization, right? Their accelerator, their studio, and maybe even potentially if they're working at a large company, if they're worried about navigating that. But I want to sort of split this up in light of that, split this up into 3 parts. One is the beginning part of the crisis. How should startups be thinking about this? Then we'll say a month after, right? Or how should startups be thinking about this, right? And sort of navigating this season. But I think finally, the long-term ramifications of these things, how should startups be thinking about that or even engaging, right? After things like, we'll say post-crisis. But I want to start with you and Tom first and just go these first 0 to 30 days. How should startups be thinking? What should startups be doing to make sure that they're financially stable, or even, we'll say, to Tom's point, even on a managerial point, that they're stable?
Yeah, so I think really day 0, which in my world happened about 2 weeks ago, where CEOs of various companies I'm involved with started thinking, oh man, right, I'm not worried about this quarter or what we thought we'd be talking about in the April board meeting, but we had to start really thinking about resetting expectations for the year, looking at where you are in your financing cycle, what about acquisition conversations, and I'd say all this really kicked in about 2 weeks ago. And people like David Cohen have written some good posts. Steve Blank put one out this morning that have sort of good playbooks on what I call just fundamentals of really knowing like where your cash position is, what your burn rate is, understanding your expense stack top to bottom. It's really, again, blocking and tackling. Like as the leader CEO, you need to be the person doing all of this. This is not something for your VPs or anyone else. You need to go deep. The concept of a war room. If you've not been through crisis management, a war room is where you used to physically get together. Now you have to do it on Zoom, but with your finance people, legal people, and really go through everything sort of line by line and not re-envision, but just make everything a variable expense. I was walking one CEO through this exercise with base pay. He was paying his VPs $225,000 a year. And I'm like, that is just not going to work. And so we should take their base to like 150 and create a concept called base supplement, a variable component to base pay that is suspended with no accruals and no equity, but only comes back when business conditions permit. And so just trying to start rethinking in a very detailed way about cash and thinking in terms of contingencies and milestones. So as a former CFO, I've always had what I call a 10, 30, 60 view of a company. And as much as I love employees, and I'm famous for being very employee centric, but I always had sort of dots on their heads that they can't see. And I'm like, are you in the 10% cut, 30% cut, or the 60% cut? Right? And it's just like, as I know that you have to have that mental transmission in your brain to be able to say, how would I run this business at a 10% tap down, a 30% tap down, or a 60% tap down? Seth with Foundry Group had a great post about a week ago, and he was encouraging their companies to do like planning for 0 growth and planning for 25% growth. And I felt like, Seth, man, where's the rest of your article, right? You didn't talk about 50% and 75%. And as we see in so many industries, the revenue's essentially gone to 0, or at least 75% off. And so I'm on a board of a company that's planning to just reduce their growth. And I wrote to the CFO, and I'm like, not reducing your growth. It's, back in 2010, this saying was 0 is the new growth, right? You can get away with that for a few years, right? Just maintaining your revenue, or having that revenue, looking at much, deeper scenarios, but having that sort of milestone-based thing, because there's so much uncertainty. You're talking about these, as you move forward into that 30 days, like I think even by the end of that 30 days, you'll have made some cuts. You're starting to see the results in the, paper over the last few days. The people are starting to make material reductions in their marketing spend and in their workforce.
Awesome.
Go forward, you don't want to death by 1,000 cuts, but I'd say maybe every 90 days, seems to set up maybe every 60 days, you have some milestones and say, well, if our customers or our pipelines are impacted, more negatively than we think, then round 2 is coming, and then round 3. You don't want to do a slow rolling of breaking the arm. So each cut has to be a material move.
And before we go to Tom, I want to ask you the same question, but just one follow-up there for you, Jim. When you are having teams plan for this period, right? I know we talked about the first 30 days, but in the first 30 days, they're planning for the future. Like you talk about with Seth's, right? With Seth's blog. Should they plan out for the quarter two, or should they be planning out for even the third, fourth quarter, even quarter one for 2021? Like how far out should people be planning right now?
I go out 24 months. So I think in some of the notes I saw from you, Pat, I think the thinking was too short, thinking in months, like 3, 6 months, or even quarters. Where I'm seeing companies really looking at 12 to 24 months of runway. It's like, how much cash do you have? What are your burn rate on these different scenarios? I was involved with a company 2 years ago that got to like 25 people, raised a couple $1 million. It wasn't working. So they pulled back to 8 people, got to cash flow neutral, and were able to move the business forward and then go raise an institutional round from Foundry Group, which was great. And then, kind of rebuild the business. So having that sense for like, really a 1 to 2 year curve of how do we make this business work. Another business got to 25 people, we had to pull it back to 4 people to get the cash flow neutral so they can try and find, a path forward from there.
Cool. That's great. Jim, same question over to you, Tom. That first one, just those first 30 days. What should we be telling our startups either about their finances or how they're managing teams?
So I'm going to focus on communication here because I think Jim covered some great bits, great points. So with respect to how you manage and think about finance, first, the tendency for teams is to get locked into how things have been. Even though they see things have changed radically, it's difficult to understand that the world isn't the same going forward. So the communication from leadership in a context like this has to be frank, has to be, here's the straight talk about what we can see. Here are the things that we don't know yet. And here's what we're going to do to find out the things that we have to figure out. Here's how we're going to learn at speed. And as far as sort of describing a path forward, because there can't be the kind of clarity that you'd like, you're doing everything to hedge bets, but there's a kind of zoom out, zoom in here. There's both that long-term perspective that is probably longer term than most of the team members have been thinking about, but the shorter term piece is not just weeks. It's literally, what are you doing today and tomorrow? And how has the world changed since the last time you looked at it? And I'll say one more thing about this. The pace in a situation like this often needs to speed up dramatically. So you can't imagine that you have as much time to do the things that you would do. This is where the notion of the war room really comes in. You're focusing in a way that allows you to move at that kind of speed and with that kind of decisiveness. So you're bringing everybody together into a room, sharing information in real time and making decisions in real time. And those decisions may be taken in the course of a day-to-day or even hour-to-hour sort of thing, depending on the nature of the crisis. So it's really beginning to think vastly differently about how you operate in a milieu where no one really can see the other end yet.
Got it. So on the call, we have people from literally all over the world. People from China, people from Italy, people from the States, people from all over Latin America. Here's my point. We're all at different stages. So, right, for those of us in the States, right, we talked about, we're sort of 2 weeks into this, where now we have people in China who are now in that phase of they're adjusting to like 3 months after this has happened. So here's my question, and I'll go to Jim and then Tom. Like we talked about, so once we get through that first crisis phase, that first 30 days, now we have sort of the 2 buckets. What does the next few weeks look like? And what should we be telling teams to think about, like the rhythms, the leadership, finances for, we'll say, the second term of the season, but also to then post that, where things start calming down, how should we be even getting our teams to think about life post-crisis today?
So I think in that second phase is where it's a kind of classic "Who Moved My Cheese" thinking, a popular book about sort of humans and change, and that One team I was speaking with recently, they had a vice president that had 25 people in his group. And as they're talking about like, how do we get our expenses in control, preserve cash, extend our runway, he was willing to give up like 5 people from his team. And the CEO was getting frustrated with him, like he was still thinking, in this old way. And so I think as you go through those first 30 days, just with the spending freeze, marketing, we're all working from home, those tactical things have all sort of kicked into place. You get into phase 2, and if you said, okay, VP, fine, you get your 5 people gone, you get to keep 20. As you hit that phase 2, you've got to think about like, accountants call it zero-based budgeting. I think a lot of startup people call it the parking lot exercise. Like if all of your people went out in the parking lot, who do you bring back first? Just let in 1 person or 2 people or 3 people. It really puts things on its head about how you really kind of build back up from zero. Like what do we really need to make this business go forward? And including, I think in that second phase, do you keep that VP? If that VP can't get with the new paradigm of uncertainty and we don't know, and I'm willing to take a huge salary cut, and again, in the US down to maybe like 60K a year. You're making $5,000 a month, that pays your health insurance and will keep things moving a bit, but that's feeling real pain, but you get to keep your job and continue to work on the mission of the business. So that's that sort of middle piece, I think, is where it gets a lot more real. If you did this sort of 10% or 20% tap down is your first move, and you get into that second phase, you might be looking at that 30 to 50% tap down. It gets a lot harder. I think the messaging to the people who stay, especially if you maybe did that, maybe a 40% tap down to start, is that sense that we've sort of taken a deep cut, and now we can sort of move forward towards maybe a more limited goal, like 1 product, 1 market with just 1 channel, and just execute on that. And then they can see that you have communicated to your employees like a cash balance, your burn rate, so they know like, oh yes, we do have 18 months or 24 months of runway to give us a chance to sort of go execute on this. Now, as the leader, you still know there's 1 more layer to go from there, but I wouldn't communicate that quite yet.
Got it. Super helpful. I like that framework a lot. Tom, same question over to you. Phase 2 and 3. How would you be telling people on the line to be thinking about this and instructing their teams to think about those 2 phases?
So in phase 2, after you've taken that initial cut, the fundamental question I'd be asking at that stage is whether the business has line of sight to viability. And I'd be looking to see what can be laid in that creates the condition for possible success moving forward. And here's the cold hard reality. If you can't see that, if you don't see a future connected to the business that you've got and the thing that you're doing, this goes back to what we said at the beginning, you might want seriously at that point to begin to think about whether it's time to begin to explore other options for the team, for the company, for the things that you're doing. So it isn't just about managing to survival. It's actually about making decisions about whether this is a viable enterprise moving forward. And that's an important thing to do. I guess the other thing is that as you're entering phase 2, what's happened is people have taken an emotional, psychological hit connected to all of this. So one of the more important things I'll emphasize here is trying to be clear about whether the thing that you're doing is worth the energy, the effort, the sacrifice, the what you're going to have to put into it. If it is, if that's the case, you've got something powerful to begin to work toward. So even as you're constraining access to core resources, that could be cash, that could be other things. At the same time, what you're looking to do is say, you're going to draw upon a commitment, an enthusiasm about the thing that you decided to do in the first place, in the place that you're headed. You just to put that off into a future that you can't see as clearly as you'd like, but now you're in a place where you can begin to think about what that looks like. And you're still not at a place where you can throw resources at it significantly, so you're conserving in a way that lets you play the game, if you decided that the game is a game worth playing.
Yeah. Jim, when we were talking about the call right before, I kept bringing up this idea of survival, right? Which Tom just talked about. And even in my blog last week, I was talking with a friend, and my friend said, the world has changed. That means our clients' jobs have changed. That means your job has changed. And I'm hearing you, Jim, go, oh, survival may not be it. Like we actually it may be better for us to leave and just stop what we're doing. And I'd love for you to expand on that more. And not only your framework to decide if we shut this down, but even like your personal story about how you thought through that and navigated that in the previous crisis.
Yeah, so I've been reading a lot the last 2 weeks. I think a lot of great advice by some very experienced and knowledgeable people about what is the playbook for survival and how do you do the cost cutting and the layoffs and all that stuff. And having been through that a couple of times, I do think as a founder back in 2000 is that we did take those bridge loans from our institutional VC. They thought they were doing the right thing. We thought we were doing the right thing. But in hindsight, I think it was just sort of delaying the inevitable. And I think that the implicit assumption is that if you're really focused on survival, I need to make this business work, you're not thinking over the long term. And that as a founder, you'll probably work on, say, 7 businesses in your career in a meaningful way. And this is just one of them, whether it's your first one or your 5th one or whichever one it is, because everything has changed. If this isn't the business for the future, then just all be adults about it and say, hey, how do we do a clean, sort of a clean wind up? And so with my startup, we raised $5 million, and it was Sequel Ventures, and we parked it, and we came up with a very specific criteria, which is if we can't get an independent lead investor by March 31st of 2001, then it's over. And so we literally just parked the business at 0, on that day. But it was clean, and we had taken it from 50 people and sort of down to probably 12 people there on the last day. And then literally went to Sequel and said, there's no more money. I need like 30 grand to pay, as the controller to do the tax return and a few other things. And they gave me the money, and I volunteered my time as a founder. I thought that was fair because they lost all their equity. The bank came out okay. So Comerica was our banker because we sold the assets. But there's that wind up process, and because the wind up was done, what I'd like to say professionally, the investors invited me to go be the CFO at a business, down the road where they'd given, $2.5 million to and said, hey, go do your thing down there. And I needed a job. So I said, sure. What's my thing? And they said, spreadsheets and people and stuff. I said, okay. And so that's how I kind of got into my next thing, right? It was as a CFO of a security company. So that's also sort of a good strategy is, going where the growth is, right? And that my business was really sort of an eyeballs play back in 2000 where that was exciting. And as we, went forward for 4 quarters, we kept changing the business model every quarter to try and find something that would work. And it was just super hard. From communicating employees and engineers and just to keep everyone on the same page, it was surprisingly difficult, and it just didn't work. It was no longer the right company for that era. And being in a security company in 01 to 03, it turned out to be a good place to be because while the world was melting down all around us, security actually wasn't that bad. Of course, the 6 months after 9/11, sort of no one bought anything, and we had to do an inside round and some other stuff. But we got Sigma Partners out of Boston to invest. We got William Blair out of Chicago to invest, and it was they believed in the market. I think it really shows what you have to raise money against a compelling need. And when my wife and I are looking at a lot of companies, we always talk about this. And I think over the last 10 years, we've become very frustrated with a certain set of people under 34. Right? They've never had to really understand what compelling need means, and I think that this is, this experience we're all going through is going to be an education for a lot of people about what is a compelling need. And if your business doesn't pass the compelling need test, you won't be able to raise your money and your customers aren't buying your stuff and you're going to have a tough go of it. And I think it's just better to let go earlier and then, put your human capital back to work in something that has the potential for more success. I think that all this thinking about how do I survive is really under counting the opportunity cost in your life for spending time on something that fundamentally shouldn't be going forward in the new market.
Got it. Jim, we're gonna dig into this, and Tom, this is like your wheelhouse here. I love Jim. I love your point. Let's raise money against a compelling need, and when you think about all the companies, like we have 100 people on the line right now. I bet these people are I mean, I bet there's 2,000 companies that are underneath the purview of these 100 people. And so many of these companies are coming to these leaders and saying, how do we change our business, right? Or do we shut down, or do we keep doing the same thing? And I'd love your help just thinking through that. Like if you were a mentor to these companies, do we change what we're doing? Do we shut down, or do we continue doing the same thing? And I just love your help thinking through that framework.
So let me jump in here for just a quick sec. I don't think I have the usual line in this. I think there are far too many founders who haven't understood at the outset that the opportunity cost of each of the things they do is enormous, that in fact they're investing the next chapter of their life in what they do when they start a venture. And that in fact that should be preceded by a kind of due diligence process that assesses whether it's worth that investment, and that's mostly missing. So ironically, when we come to times like this, it's a great time to begin to turn the lens on exactly that question and think it through again. Maybe you missed it the first time. Maybe you actually started something that wasn't worth the investment of your time, energy, and attention, the next chapter of your life. Now is maybe not too late to begin to think about whether that makes sense or not. A couple of other things, just because they popped up. So what Jim talked about, learning from folks who've done this before. This is kind of what we're trying to do here. It's a really valuable thing to do. Go, read Ben Horowitz' Hard Thing About Hard Things. I mean, there's some wonderful things there that are applicable in this context. I mean, powerful things. Learn from the folks who actually have seen so many of these things. Back when we did the $21 million raise and the 2000-2001 timeframe, Brad Fell was an investor in that. He was on my board. What Brad brought to the table at the time was that he was on 30 boards of directors, and he saw everything. I mean, he just had the long view about what was happening in the world. And I knew no one in the local ecosystem who could see as far or understood as much as he did. So there's another thing, right? What can you use in terms of the people that you know, the resources you have access to inform yourself about what will make sense and what won't as you go forward. So that's a big thing. And then the third thing I want to sneak in here, there's a framework called Cuneiform by Dave Snowden. I think he put this together in about 1999. And it's interesting. It's about simple problems, and it's about complicated problems. It's about chaos in context. It's about disorder. But one of the interesting things about it is that when things are simple, you can use best practices. When they're complicated, you can't. You have to take a different tack. When things are in a state of chaos, you have to take a different tack. And when things are in a state of disorder, you have to take a different tack. So thinking through what you can do in the context of uncertainty actually demands that you approach things differently. It's not like you can turn to best practices for how to deal with something no one's dealt with before and is in a different context than anyone's ever seen. You actually have to begin to think in terms of disorder and chaos and understand that sometimes you'll need to take action and see what the result is that gets produced. So decision-making in all of this changes radically because of the context, and changes radically based on what it is you're actually deciding to do and pursue. And Jim said this, look, if the business that you're in, it doesn't make sense, that's one thing. In some cases, and by the way, it's by no means the same across all sectors. There are some sectors in this context that are booming. Amazon isn't hurting at the moment. Zoom isn't hurting at the moment. Slack isn't hurting at the moment. But I can name, and you all can name, dozens of sectors where things are decimated. I mean, just really in a world of hurt, and will be for a long, long time. What are your businesses? What are you in? What are you doing? And what can you actually see, and what can you not see? Those things are going to matter a lot in terms of your decision making and whether it makes any sense to move forward. And back again to the mission. Is it worth the investment of your time, energy, effort, the investors' dollars? Is there a way to realize a success for the stakeholders that you represent in all this? It's you, it's your team, it's your partners, it's your investors, it's your customers. Is there a success scenario for that group of stakeholders on the other side of this? If there isn't, think really hard about what alternatives you have.
Tom, great point. And Cass just sent over the David Snowden framework in the group chat. And just so everybody knows too, we have about 10 more minutes with these two gentlemen, and then we're going to turn it over to Laurie. So if you have other questions you want to be asking these guys, just make sure you do it now. Jim, the same question over to you, right? How do we even, Tom did a great job sort of teeing up this idea of how do we even begin to help companies think about, do they stay the course, do they shut down, or do they change what they're doing? I'd love to pose that same question to you. How do we mentor and coach startups to debate those three options?
Yeah, I think that it's Jim Collins, Confronting Brutal Facts, sort of a thinking and analysis. I'm going to take it from the sort of portfolio manager's point of view, right? So they think that if you're running an accelerator, you have this group of people, much like a venture capitalist, and I'm talking to venture capitalists and say that 01 to 06 period, they all felt like they're all doing portfolio triage, right? It's like, oh, how do I, make my portfolio work? And I think some VCs look back on that period and said, maybe that wasn't a good use of our time or of our founders' time, and that we should have been investing in the new growth of that area, the rise of social, or 10 years later, the rise of cloud computing, right? And that what should have been the focus in, say, the 08, 09 period was investing in cloud. David Cohen had a good article about investing in Uber at 4 million pre, and Twilio at 3 million pre, and SendGrid at 2 million pre, right? You could only do that in 09 on that sort of backside of a troubling time. I think to your specific question, it's like, how do you work with those people? It's that, against that compelling need is the scalpel. And I'm pretty close to like the Techstars portfolio companies. And I think that the compelling need companies would be the exception, not the rule. So think of, it's 1 in 10, I think, probably a legitimate compelling need story. And 9 out of 10, probably don't. Maybe there's a middle third that are iffy, but there's a bottom third or bottom half that things just aren't there. So I think as you look at your portfolio, that's sort of what you should be sort of looking for. If you're trying to save 10 out of 10, then I think you're probably 90% of your effort is probably going in the wrong place. And really look for that 1 out of 10 that's like, oh yeah, this is it's a medical drone delivery company, right? Telemedicine, like, okay, that's part of the new world order. But if it's, doing something, for millennials when they had, fancy jobs in San Francisco, that maybe is not the right company. So here's having, my wife and I call it a down market screen as we look at new things. We've been doing this for a long time. We'll hear some pitch. We're like, oh yeah, that's great as long as everything keeps going like this. But what do you do in a down market? And people will say stuff, and it's probably good enough to get a Series A check or whatever. But then now you've got to go live it. Can you actually execute on your down market plan? And I think that's where that'll all fall apart. Even a business I've run, it's like you think you have a down market plan, right? But you don't know until you try to go and sell in a down market, right? The hard part in this new world order is, sales and fundraising. The easy parts now are landlords and employees and vendors of all sorts suddenly become very inexpensive and flexible.
That's all. Jim, I will never forget, we're sitting at this restaurant called Acorn here in Denver, and we were talking about all these different startups and that we were thinking about investing in, that you also looked at as well. And you just kept going, it's a boom time company. And I would go next one. You're like, it's a boom time company. I'm like, you're 100% right. And that has been one of the frameworks Riley and I think about a lot when we're looking at companies. And we're like, is it a boom time company? And and it's and I think to your point, we have to have a compelling need. They have to have companies that actually solve a compelling need, and a lot of those companies aren't going to survive.
Yeah, and I think your answer is a compelling need to say, are they getting money from customers, and are they getting money from new investors? And if they're not, then it's not compelling. Even if you think it's compelling and they think it's compelling, it's like, it just isn't. And that's why we needed this time to close our business, because we couldn't get customers to pay, we couldn't get investors to write checks. I call it the 3 mile post of failure. It's like not pivoting, but failure. It's like set out 3 things that have to happen, right? And when that third thing doesn't happen, really stop and think about what you're doing. or what your portfolio companies are doing. And maybe this just isn't good use of your money and their time, and free them up. And it can be painful in the short run, to go through that transition, but I've been through it a number of times, but it's always come out, better on the other end. That's how I became a CEO, as I got fired as the CFO. If I wouldn't have crashed one company, you wouldn't have had this other experience. And it all sort of, works forward in the grand scheme of things.
Got it. Well, we have two questions, one from Cass and another, and I'm going to end with one, and then we'll hand it over to Laurie. So this one from Cass. Cass just asked, how do you manage investor expectations and communicating a new strategy with your board, as well as team motivation and response to the rapidly changing plans that require responsive actions? Maybe Tom will go to you first and then go to Jim with that question.
So I think some of this depends on the nature of your relationship with your board, but fundamentally you want a board that's in the loop about everything in this context. No surprises, right? None at all. So it ought to be true that there's a regular rhythm of communication that's much more immediate, much shorter in time, and that rhythm in communication with investors helps a lot, because investors want to know what's actually going on with you in context. But the other thing you want to do is you want to learn where investors sit themselves. The world that they live in isn't just about you. And you know this in the Accelerator context, you know this as a business, that your investors are looking at the market, they're looking at the collection of opportunities and the things that aren't there that used to be there. And you want to understand as quickly as you can the receptivity of the investor base that you have and what their capacity is likely to be, and learn that as quickly as you can. So framing whatever you frame has to be done in context, in the reality of the situation in the world that you're facing. And I wouldn't spare the bad news in this context. You can't. You've got to say what there is about that. And you have to get to a place pretty quickly where there's significant buy-in from investors to be able to navigate the uncertainty around this. Without that kind of buy-in, it's pretty tough to move forward.
Jim, same question over to you.
Yeah, so I think your investor communication just got a whole lot easier because it's a disaster, right? And it's not on you, right? You could be like, this is the perfect time to lower guidance like massively, right? If you haven't learned this before, if you ever have to give bad news, just like give all the bad news, just throw everything in there you can. If you have any skeletons you've been hiding anywhere, exactly. Get them out, right? Just those numbers, right? Like, and that's why if you were projecting 50%, and you think you can do 25%, these are positive numbers now, right? You'd say 0 or 10 or something, right? Like, just give yourself you get a free pass on all the investors, right? They're fear or greed. There's 2 modes, right? So they all went from greed mode to fear mode. The only thing they're thinking is, how much money do you need from me to make payroll on Friday? If you go to them and say, hey, look, we don't need any money from you. Here's how fast we can grow. Maybe 0, right? Or whatever. And they'll be like, fine, good, keep doing that, right? Because it's a free option on your business for them. It's just when you have to say, well, we need, $300,000 a month to make payroll, that million a quarter is suddenly going to be a super hard conversation. And it's not that your investor's the bad person, but when they go to their partnership, et cetera, right? That's where it'll break down and, it'll be tough. And then I think on the employee side, the second part of the question, I think, especially you've done, say, a 30 to 40% RIF, and I think that's, it's steep. Hopefully that's all you need and you won't hit that next trigger. But then just being completely focused on mission. And everyone there's like no benefits and all that stuff. And you pay for health insurance, but not all the free stuff. All that goes away. And people should be really focused on why they're there, which is 100% about the mission of your business. And if they're not in it for the mission, then they probably shouldn't have been out in that first third. But they should be excited about what you do because of the impact you're making in the world.
Got it. Hey, last question, and we'll go rapid fire in this. And hopefully this brings it all together, but a lot of people on the phone are board members, right? And two, I'm looking at you two, right? I mean, Jim, you're on how many boards? Like 5 or 6 boards. Tom, you've got your 12 entities. You all are having conversations with many of these companies. What advice would you give the people on the line as they're talking with these startups? Like, I'm almost going like, what's the script that you should be working on as you talk to these startups about the things you should be prioritizing in your conversations with these companies? one of the things, Tom, and I'm sort of baiting you a little bit here, but you talked about how the pace speeds up dramatically, right? And I'm even going like, how much do we care about the emotional well-being of founders during this time? And I know that maybe you just go, of course we need to, but I'm wondering, even this time, how much is that in the order of priority that we care about? And whoever wants to go first can go.
So I'll just speak briefly to this. There is a personal piece to this and the communication with the founders. I mean, there's you and your safety, your health, your well-being, your family, and in times like these, that set of circles tends to narrow pretty quickly. You could be broadly concerned in a good time, but in a time like this, suddenly you start to get really focused on the base level of Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, it's survival first, and then seeing what else you've got, or put your mask on first if you like, right? So you want to make sure that the folks that you're talking to that are running the companies that you've helped foster or create, that they have a plan to manage through this personally, right? And take care of themselves and their families. At the same time, you want to make sure that they're thinking about this in the way that they talk about this with their team and with their investors, with their customers, represents the reality of the world as we can see it now, and gives them options in terms of being able to maneuver and make decisions at speed. So if I can't see a path through because the industry has so radically changed, and I ask questions about that and they can't see a path through, well, it's time to have that fundamental hard talk. And that's going to happen. So
yeah. Awesome. Jim, same thing.
Yeah, I think that that playbook is around like talking about the financials, but really listening to your employees and your customers and your key partners, sort of come up with individual plans for those people and their situations. It's just over communicating. I think that's something as a CEO or founder you think you're always doing, but I think even in this, you have to, if you don't feel like a complete broken record and communicating that message about the message and what you're doing and why you're doing it, it should really feel repetitive yourself. On the founder health issue, I've seen I think more issues in the Series B level than early stage. I mean, early stage is always chaotic and crazy, but it's when you have tens of millions of dollars raised, hundreds of millions of dollars in the line, hundreds of people. That's where I've seen one founder CEO end up in the hospital, right? Because just an anxiety attack, right? And so I think in this situation, this seems a little perverse, but I like it. To me, it's exciting. It's thrilling. I think that having all this shit going wrong, really test your skills. And if you're in this for the long haul, this is what you do, then this is like your Olympics. This is where it's like game on, right? That when you can raise lots of money and sales aren't that hard, then it's just not as challenging as what we're doing now. And that I think that for some people who are like me, if you're sort of a lifer in this, this is game time. This is exciting. It's like, I think the mental health, oddly enough, is improved because you're hyper focused.
Yeah.
I think of the movie The Hurt Locker, which I think played to a worldwide audience, and when these people do bomb detection, for a job, it's just so thrilling that when they get out of the army and they go back to civilian life, they're kind of, it's not the same, and so they want to go back into the action and get into something that's really intense. So I think when people look back on this time, maybe in 24 to 48 months from now, and they'll think, holy shit, that was intense. And maybe we got through it, maybe we didn't. We got through it as people, and maybe we're now in a different business or whatever. But when you're in that moment, that is, I think the most exciting times of your professional career.
you
Awesome.
are
Yes, Tom.
you are Winston Churchill here, right? You are, and seriously, this is imagine for just a moment that everything else that happened in your life up to now, it put you in this position and prepared you for dealing with this as a leader. That Jim just described that situation, and that each of you, if you can think of yourself in that way, that's a powerful place to be.
Gentlemen, thank you for an incredible call today. I'm getting just notes from people just saying how awesome it was. So thank you so much for the wisdom, for you navigating this before and being transparent today. It was amazing. I want to sort of pause it there. And if you need, especially if you're out of the States, feel free to jump off. We're going to have Laurie come in and give us the 101, 201 of what we're seeing with the CARES Act. Laurie leads the VC relationships and the seed stage practice at Pacific West Bank, which is our bank and one of the premier banks for startups in the United States. She's worked at Wells Fargo, Silicon Valley Bank, Comerica Bank, and also led the Halo report. So Laurie, I'm going to hand it over to you. If you could just give us, again, the 101, 201 of the CARES Act and what you think people need to be thinking about right now related to but more importantly, what they need to be telling their startups right now to be thinking about the CARES Act. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, sure. And thank you. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. So, I think the important thing is that, the government has implemented a program that's designed to try to help support small businesses. So there's a lot of information out there. A lot of that information is still, some of it's accurate, some of it's not accurate. Some of this is still being determined. So at a high level, I don't have enough time to really dive into the programs, but there are two primary programs that are available to startups that you should look into. So, heeding Jim and Tom's advice, once you decide that you have an accurate handle on what your head count's going to be, what your costs are going to be, you should explore both the SBA disaster loan program. Under that, they have an economic injury disaster loans, and those loans are very favorable in terms of repayment terms, interest rates, and they can be utilized to help with certain costs associated with your business. So that's one program. And then there's also the payment protection payment protection plan loans, which I think is getting a lot more attention than the other loans for the startup community. And that loan is basically designed to help with payroll costs. And there is a portion of that can be forgiven if it's used for a certain period of time. But again, it's something that you really need to have a handle on what your headcount is going to be. The forgiveness part of it is tied to employee retention and keeping people employed. So I think what's not talked about under the CARES Act as well is that there's also there are some different plans relative to payroll taxes and help with tax credits. So I would encourage everyone to talk to your payroll providers and see if there's some relief there that you can get as well that may be helpful for you. But if you are contemplating either of the loans that are available through the SBA, the disaster relief loans, the EIDL loans are administered through the SBA, not through banks, so you have to apply there. The PPP loans are administered through SBA approved banks, so I would encourage you to contact your banks, see if they're an approved SBA lender. If not, I'd encourage you to try to find an SBA lender. Applications for that loan will not happen until Friday. I think they're opening the doors on Friday, but you should be prepared. There are some provisions under it that certain startups may not qualify based on, whether it has to do with controlling interest and how many employees they have. So they have to have under 500 employees. And because of the control mechanisms that the SBA employs, there are certain venture-backed startups that are not going to qualify because of negative controls and things of that nature that bump the affiliation, so that companies are looked at based on their affiliation with the venture fund and aggregating the portfolio. So it's very nuanced. It's a long way of saying it's nuanced. You're likely going to need to work with your attorneys to figure out whether or not you qualify.
Awesome.
So I'll pause there.
No, this is awesome. I'm hearing three things, right? So we have the SBA disaster relief loan. This is the 7A, right? Which is where you can get, right, for if you're in a disaster area, you can get access to this. The PPP, right, which is where you have to, it's a loan, which is up to like 2.5 months of payroll and other sort of other expenses, right? And that goes through your bank. Right. And then the third one is your payroll taxes, where you can forego your payroll taxes related to Social Security. So it's like the 6.2%, right? Am I hearing that right? But that has to be paid back in the next year or two, right? In the next, like in 2021, half it has to be paid back, and in 2022, half it has to be paid back. Is that right?
I believe that's correct. I'm not as versed on the payroll tax portion of it. So, but the loan portion, yes.
Awesome. Great. And I just had a question from Evans here. And by the way, if you need to jump off, feel free. We're going to go just maybe no more than 5 minutes over. But if you need to jump off, feel free. But Laurie, can Laurie ask the question being asked by ACA? Is there any chance they will reconsider the affiliation rules she just mentioned? This is from Evans.
I mean, I think it's definitely something that there's getting a lot of pushback on, and I think it's a TBD. I think if you think of the spirit of the act, it really is to help keep, it's to help those that really don't have access to capital. And so I'm not sure if, because of that, they're really drawing a line in the sand that, certain companies that are venture backed or, largely have access to capital, that some of the small businesses, you think of the mom and pop shops that are not open, the restaurants and others that really don't have access to capital, that don't have really anybody to go to try to keep food on the table. So, will they consider it? I'm sure they're getting lobbied pretty hard. But as of now, the guidance that we have is that, it doesn't look as though there has been any changes, but, that's always subject to change. So I would just keep your eyes open, keep checking back. Your lawyers are likely very versed on what's going on, as are the banks. I mean, we're taking our guidance. The only opinion that matters is what the SBA says, and we take our guidance from them.
Hey, Laura, last question for you. When it comes to getting the banks what they need for the PPP, what should accelerators, studios, funds be telling their startups to do right now to get ready to access the PPP with banks?
Yeah, so they should absolutely be contacting their bank to find out whether or not they're an approved lender, and then get on a list, make sure that they're in the list or on a list. And then once the applications are ready, the banks will send them the application. So if their bank is not approved, they need to move on quickly and find a bank that is approved. A lot of banks are, obviously there's a lot of interest in it, and so banks have to prioritize where they're going to focus their time and attention. But I think the one thing I would caution people is that they're, like with any time of crisis, there unfortunately is a lot of fraud out there. So really be careful of people that are telling you they can get you access and all of that. It's not overly complex how this gets done. Banks are approved. They're either approved or they're not approved to administer it. And so just be careful out there.
Awesome. Laurie, thank you so much. Jim and Tom, thank you again. If anybody wants to talk to Laurie directly, just shoot me a note. I'm at pat@again.co, and I'd be happy to connect you with Laurie. So
yeah,
everybody,
please,
thank you.
I'm
It's so
happy
good
to
talking
help.
with you, and I'll talk to most of you next week.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.
See you later. Bye, guys.